This could be the most boring podcast ever.
What good words to come into it, Simon. Well done. We're
It's my job.
everyone's
I
just
put my
turned
foot in my mouth.
everyone's just turned off right away. Hello everybody. Welcome to the What's On at Elephant and Castle Facebook page. I'm Nick from Retribe, and joining us today is Simon Conti, who you call yourself a conceptual creative. Is that the right?
Yeah, it is. I don't think anybody's got the right to call themselves a creative, but I think that's the mantle that I can use.
Okay. Hey, describe what one is.
Well, it's various things. I started in advertising when the world was in black and white, many moons ago, working for an agency called Darcy Macias Benton and Bowles, which was the first big agency to go bust. I think that was probably my fault. And I've created ads pretty much all over the world, in Asia, Russia, America. But I've also diverse into, I've got a game show on Netflix. I'm developing a board game. I'm just doing a program on super yachts, which is obviously my main bag. I know a lot about super yachts, but it's a documentary on sustainability of them, which would be quite interesting. So conceptual creative is somebody that kind of tends to lean to just creating anything they can. I mean, the problem with the industry with advertising at the moment, and I hate problems, is that people tend to think that if you haven't done a beauty campaign, then you can't do beauty, or if you haven't done cars, you haven't done cars, or if you have, and I've done all of them, to be honest with you. But it's, if you're a creative, you can create for anything, and an idea is an idea, regardless of what it is.
Right. I want to get into more of the stuff you've done, but let's jump right in the deep end, Simon, about the industry that you work in, and the thing about being a creative. Like, I'm really interested in the understanding of when people, like the term brainstorm, when they get together and they come up with ideas. I'm really interested in the dynamic, because I've been in some myself, the dynamic of egos.
Yeah.
Let's jump in on that. Let's go into egos and creative process.
Well, weirdly, the egos don't come from the creatives, because they tend to feed off each other, or they get disappointed when somebody else has come up with a better concept than they have. But in reality, they'll accept that it's a better concept, and they'll try and help. Egos aren't as rife as they were in a creative sense in advertising at the moment. I mean, the issues that go on at the moment is a lot of advertising or creative is based around finance. It's what the bottom line is. It's not so much about the idea anymore. And believe me, there's some amazing creatives out there doing some amazing ideas. But the ideas you see on TV aren't the ideas they started with. They've normally been watered down because somebody from whatever area, whether it's the client or the suits or whatever, all think they need to have an input on it. And, it's like anything. Once you start to, I'll add that bit, I'll add that bit, I'll add that bit. It's incredible how an ad can go from being a fantastic ad to a below average ad that nobody wants to see. Because in my day, people look forward to advertising, and still to the point, if you look at John Lewis's Christmas campaign, the hype around that is amazing. Everything's got to see it. But, back in, well, as I say, when the world was in black and white, all ads were quite cool. They were very different. The creatives were king then, and they were allowed to run with things. Obviously, not to the detriment of the client, because you've always got to sell for them. But the industry has changed, and there's lots more platforms to create for as well. So you've got to be aware of, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever you want to do, and how it works through that.
Yeah. I do remember, you're talking about the kind of older campaigns that came out, and I know particularly in the UK there were some really cool ones, and one that always remember is the Rolo one with the elephant. I don't know if you remember it. The elephant never forgets.
I'd like to pretend, but no.
Yeah. No, there's a kid who teases an elephant at the circus with his last Rolo and eats it. and then the elephant is bigger and the kid is bigger, and they same a different circus, and then the elephant's trunk comes and smacks the kid.
Smacks it.
And it's like an elephant never forgets. So but
probably couldn't do that now because it's abuse, but and that's the other thing, you know, we've got this whole cancel culture. People can't take as many risks as we could have taken in the past. We can say different things in a different way, but everybody is now completely worried about upsetting one demographic or another demographic, which is really sad, because, you know, we're all, individuals are becoming less and less, and individual ideas are becoming less and less. And I'm sure that if anybody from advertising is watching, they're probably abusing me as as we speak, but, you know, it's just my opinion of the way it goes.
So the initial concept, and I understand that some people just can come up with an idea, and then it kind of, like you say, like the bureaucracy of an idea that gets it loses its flavor, doesn't it, towards the end of it, where, you know, the initial, and I know people say in a postmodern world, no idea is unique, but I think that I mean, surely we want to kind of evolve into what people come up with certain visualizations of a concept, whether it's about what we were just talking about before we went live, of you just coming up with a quick idea about where to hold a coffee morning. Like, these are just things that come to certain people, and certain people have a gift of that. And I'm just, you know, I'm hoping that we end up evolving where we can start to nourish those ideas and let them flourish, and rather than take away from it, actually water it and make sure it can grow.
Yeah,
not
I think
just in advertising.
No. In art, you know, there are a lot of barriers to being involved in anything that's creative. You know, from art to advertising to whatever. You know, you've got to jump through hurdles, and those hurdles tend to knock the socks off you or the stuffing out of you to a point, because you're already indoctrinized rather than, you know, being a free thinker. There are lots of good things going on in the industry, and there are companies like Bartle Bogle and Hegedee BBH who still are adamant that the idea comes from the agency. It doesn't come from the client. It doesn't come from the account handlers. It comes from the creatives, and it shows in their work. But there are smaller agencies. There's one called Mamapool, who have just started, ex-created from Saatchi's. You know, and they're just starting to do some really interesting stuff, including an ad which I won't tell you what the concept is, but it'll be a world first. But there's, you know, people are thinking about ecology, green, etc., more in what they do as well and what they say, because they're getting more awards. So it's interesting times in the industry.
What are some of the things that you're most proud of during your, I don't want to say how many years you've been in the industry, over the year or two?
I mean, I won't go into the ads I've done, because, you know, what I think I'm proud of is more the way we got to the end and the people that have been involved. You know, they're the backroom people, the camera crews, the sound men, the actors. You know, the people you meet along the way are great, and they normally are there to do the job rather than be belligerent about it. So, you know, I've met a lot of people. I hope I've got a lot of friends within the industry. And you know, if somebody says they like an ad, then that's great. But you know, I'm not one. I don't particularly like shouting about what I've done, because, you know, it's what's the next thing that comes on.
I think it's more about being proud of the journey rather than the
and the people you meet on the journey. You know, the clients can be amazing or they can be awful. You know, they can interfere or they can just listen and get on with it. We listen as well and adapt if we need to. But, you know, the whole process is fun.
What about this, you know, like you're talking about the bonding, what about the struggles along the way? You know, like because I find that those are the things that, you know, struggles with getting campaigns out, struggles with any kind of thing, they're the ones that tend to unite people.
Yeah, but I think the struggles that, you know, personally I've had is getting an idea that I know or I believe, arrogant, to be a good idea, to get people to understand them, because people tend to take a knee jerk and go, oh no, I'm not sure about that, or oh, that's a bit risky. So I think the struggle, I mean, from a creative point of view, the biggest struggle is having that white piece of paper when you've got a brief. I don't know any creative that doesn't fear that white piece of paper. And then it's having the time to, you either come up with a concept straight away, or it might take a couple of days, but it's just having that space to do it. And I'm not a big one for creatives sitting in agencies, you know, looking at walls. You know, I'd rather they went out, did their thing, came back with a great concept. But it's never easy if somebody doesn't like your idea.
Everyone's a critic, right?
Yeah, and that's the biggest struggle I think creatives have. Yeah. And you know, the frustration of coming up against everything I've mentioned, you know, whether it's the client wants to put their idea in and you have to adapt your idea to adapt them, or a account handler wants their 10 penneth, or they're just reacting to what the client wants, then, you know, that's frustrating, because you know, yes, we're creators, but we're also relatively intelligent. We see what's going on. What's happened? Has everybody just left? I don't blame them.
No, we're good.
Yeah, but yeah, those are the only struggles that, you know, I see.
Yeah.
But all in all, it's a good industry to be in.
We were talking yesterday about perceptions. You live in perceptions. Yeah. You live in a world where, you know, you have an idea and it's your perception, but it has to be a perception that is seen by multiple different perceptions. Yeah. I have a view, I have an opinion, and then I can have my opinion based on certain experiences in my life, but it's mine. But your world is about coming up with a message that can reach literally millions of different people's perceptions.
Yeah.
How hard is that?
Well, I mean, the client tends to know roughly what they want and who they're talking to. So you've got an idea of who the audience is before you start even thinking about it. So, you know, whether it's an 18-year-old or whether it's a 50-year-old, you know what parameters you're playing in. But quite often you kind of stray away a bit, because you can see that what will excite an 18-year-old will still excite a 50-year-old. You know, we're living in a time where in old people's home in 20 years' time, it'll be AC/DC playing on the radio, you know, not Brahms or whoever. So you just got to be aware of who your audience are, to be honest with you.
Where I know one of the big concerns for definitely smaller size businesses right now that are battling, you know, possibly another 4 weeks of being locked down, but I know that planning and advertising, marketing is at the kind of forefront of how do they attract people back into you know, foot flow and getting by their shops and stuff. Have you seen a lot of you know, struggles with, obviously the last year has been crippling for organizations, but how are people altering their marketing campaigns and strategies?
I mean, just to go back on that, you know, the events industry themselves have been knocked for six. You know, the crew, the people that put on big events, the people that put on brand experience things that we do have been absolutely decimated. Advertising has tended to go more towards being online, just because that's where they were driven, or, you know, television to a certain degree. But when you come to events or brand experience events, I think people are gearing up to being allowed to do, like we were talking about your coffee shop in the park across the road. You know, we do events for whatever brand that are outdoor, you know, and it's not just people giving flyers away. You know, it's actually creating an event. And I think they're geared up to do more of those, because people will want to be outside. So, you know, the film industry went through the same thing, and you know, it's very difficult to get a studio for the film industry now, because they're all booked up in advance, because they've got to get up and do something. And our industry are exactly the same. They have to start really pushing. But advertising is always the first one to suffer and the last one to recover in any economic downturn. So, you know, I haven't got the answer to what they're going to be doing, but I do know that people are gearing up more and more to start a bigger push, which was probably going to start on the 21st, but now it's been put back by 4 weeks. But they're ready. They'll be there. and they'll offer a lot of fun and they'll try and sell you stuff. Obviously, that's advertising, but hopefully they'll have fun on the way, because everything was based around COVID, which has been pretty much the direst thing that you could try and sell through. But I think people are now looking for a bit of fun, just to get out and do it.
I want to kind of talk about the importance of it, marketing and advertising, because it's obviously essential, because it wouldn't be a billion-pound industry. People need to advertise. But what's the when as you said, it's the one budget that gets cut when things start to get a little bit slimmer. So how do you balance that out with actually being able to sell your product, or completely eliminate your advertising, your budget? So kind of that balance between it.
I think the successful companies have always been the ones that carry on advertising regardless, because everybody's fickle out there, and it's a fickle world. So, Nike didn't become Nike by not being progressive in what they're doing. They carried on, they sold, they adapt to any situation. And it's those who don't adapt and don't spend money in times like this are soon forgotten. And I just think that everybody was, well, none of us knew what the hell was going on during COVID. It was the weirdest time I've ever been through, and I'm a lot older than you.
Not by much.
They're not by much, but nobody had experienced this, so we weren't really geared up for it. I think what it has done is a lot of agencies are now getting involved with charities more. They understand that a company that shows empathy with things in this day and age are accepted more than people that just tend to steamroller across everything, which is a good thing, right? If they're going to help out, then they're great. And creatives love an advertising campaign because it tends to win awards if it's a good one. So there's a mercenary angle of it.
Well, I think that there is that balance, right, between becoming like ethically guided for your company or using it for publicity. And I think that we are probably on this shift now where more companies are thinking, without sustainability, without us having ethical factory processes or shipping processes, or green replanting of trees, etc., then there's going to be no economy for people to be able to work from. So I think it is that balance of making it a PR thing and actually practically trying to save the planet in some ways, using corporations to do that. Because technically, the corporate world, that kind of power system that I know you and I talk about a lot, does need to become destabilized and change and transform.
Yeah, absolutely. But don't be fooled by the fact that it's the right, people want to be seen doing it, or they think they're going to get an award for it, whatever. People actually want to do the right thing. And they want to help to change the planet, but we're all kind of helpless, right? We can do our own thing, we can recycle, we can do the right thing in our little minimum thing, but to make a big difference is really difficult. It's like the Crack Not Broken campaign I did. It was a simple selfie with Crack Not Broken in show of support for those who suffer from mental health. And in COVID, that went up, tenfold around the world. If you look at the news and the Google searches, the dynamics of those, the mental health is massive at the moment. But I want to do more, and I will try and do more. We've got another filter coming out, but it's heartbreaking, because all you can do is let people come to you to help you, then push it out. And we had over 1 million hits on the filter, and tons of people actually took a photograph in support, but it's not enough. And then you get, you feel completely helpless because you want to do more and more and more. But actually, just the show of support, for people who suffer, and even people don't suffer. If you were sitting in a room during lockdown, you needed all the help you can get. So we try and do as much as we can, but everybody's got their limitation. It's like retry, right? You've got great, amazing ideas that are going to go forward, but they're not going to go forward as quickly as you want them to. because you can't, because you haven't got the time of day, you haven't got the budget. You know, Crack Not Broken was you know, we had
explain more about Crack Not Broken, how it came around.
Well, Crack Not Broken is an Instagram and it's on Facebook, and I was working with a fantastic lady called Katie Bell, who, you know, just has got an amazing mind, and huge amounts of drive. And we were kind of just sitting thinking, what you know, we had a concept, I had a concept, what can we do with it? And then so we thought, well, you know, even if it's just a show of support and it's no deeper than that, then, you know, to create a filter, because everybody loves a selfie apparently, that people could just post onto the site to say, Crack Not Broken, we hear you. Then it's a simple concept that went out there. And, you know, it did well. It started with big intentions. I wanted to get brands involved, which I won't go into because I still think there's room for that. But, you know, brands didn't know what to do. We were in COVID. They were kind of battening down the hatches rather than spending money, although I wasn't actually asking for money. But I still think that people need to know that, you know, there's no stigma to mental health, and there's no level to mental health either. You know, you can stub your toe and you're suffering for 2 days, but everybody suffers, everybody goes through it. So showing your face, either because you suffer or you're in support of it, I think it's an amazing thing. And it takes 2 minutes. You know, you're not asking for donations, you're not asking for anything else. You're just saying, you know, show everybody that they're supported, and get people to talk about it. Because we talked yesterday about language, you know, and the ability to, or the inability to have the words to say, to explain, you know, if you're angry, if you're upset, if you think people are bored with you, and you think that you're being a burden on everybody, but you've got no way of saying anything like that. And I think, you know, the thing to do is ask for help, is just go out there, say you're suffering, don't try and hide why you're suffering, don't try and say, oh, it's not so bad, or, you know, just tell people, because you'd be amazed at people. You know, we had Eddie Marsden, the actor, Jason Fleming, Kyle Simmons, and Dan Smith from Bastille, and many, many more people, you know, Leo Greggs. And that I hate asking for help. You know, I hate asking these people to come and help. But I got the courage to do it, and I know some of them anyway. And they were there immediately, you know, whatever you want, you know. And I told them I just want a selfie. And they would go, is that enough? You know, what more can we do? And I actually didn't know what to add to, you know, I didn't know the answer to that, because the platform is only based for a selfie. So we're now getting into, as I say, we've got another filter coming out. I've got a film coming out that's based around a piece of prose that I wrote with the help of Melbourne, and that's a name, not a city. And Jess Whittaker did the voiceover for it. Mark Marive is an amazing cameraman and all-round guy. And there are other people willing to help. I've got Rita Sever, who's doing a ballet to the prose. And I didn't even have to mention, can you help? They were just, right, we're in, what do you want to do? But also, people shouldn't get disappointed by people who can't help, you know, people who do say no, because they've got their own life to live. They're doing other things. You know, they're not knocking you down because they don't like the concept or they don't want to help, but they can only do a certain amount, which is an issue with celebrities, because if they say no, people think they're horrible people, and they're not. They're busy people, you know. So I was very lucky in the people that helped, and hopefully will help going forward. You know, people like, you know, Jamie Stevens and Ken Matsu from JSR agency. They just built this new filter for me for nothing, you know, and they're willing to get involved on any level, you know, and that's an agency that is willing to put their time to something at their cost. So So yeah, don't be afraid to ask. If you've got issues, don't be afraid to talk about it. If you can't find your words, just think about it, because nobody's going to judge you. You know, you think you're being annoying, but it'll be more annoying if you do something stupid to the people that could have helped.
Yeah. I think for me, it's that thing of like, there's a lot of shame attached to asking for help. There's a lot of thing of like, the reason what that stopped me for so long for asking for help is that I thought people would judge me. I thought people would call me weak. I thought people would, yeah, think that I had a lack of willpower, you know, and that I wasn't as strong as them, and they would give bad advice. And that was a fear that really wasn't true, because eventually when I did say help me to somebody, you know, it was right there. It was
Yeah,
right there. And it was those two words saved my life, because I was on death's door with you know what I was going through. So, but I think that, you know, and I think that what you're doing, this is why, you know, you and I connected right off the bat with Crack Not Broken, is because I love the fact that everyone has had something happen to them in their life where they become cracked, where there's an element of trauma. I don't know, you know, and especially living in the Western world, when school systems, like how you were talking about the other day, a teacher not having the language to be able to communicate to you something actually created a trauma in you. It cracked you. And they didn't mean to do that.
no,
So we live in a society where there's tons of it's built around cracking people because there's just not enough. And I think it really comes down to compassion.
yeah, it does. But there is, you know, there's always light within the crack, to be trite
Mhm.
about it. But you know, most people are cracked. Most people, you know, it can be a conversation, it can be therapy, you know, it can be anything that will get them through it. But they will get through it, and they'll be amazed at the life that they can have after being through it. But when you're in it, it's really difficult. As you say, we've all suffered. I've suffered. Um, you know, I grew up in a town in Wales where there's some amazing people in Lampard in Wales, you know, and they help each other. You know, they're good people, and they make me smile. We're still friends on Facebook. If I had a problem and went back there, then they would help. And likewise, if I can help them, they would help them. So even if you go back to your roots, there's always people that will help. And you know, whether you talk to them yesterday or 40 years ago, you know, they'd still be there. People are genuinely good. Well, I
Oh,
like to believe people are genuinely good.
do you know, I completely agree. I think everyone is born beautiful and a spirit of the universe. You know, we're all there, and then we're having this human experience, and things happen to us. I don't know why they happen to us. I just know that they do. I don't know what, you know, why would happen to me growing up where I grew up. You know, there was trauma that happened, you know. But I suppose it's how do we learn from it? You know, what is the lesson in all of the things that are here to teach us? And I don't know that. I do know in my journey is that if I can be here to be of service and help people, then it just makes life a little bit less complicated,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
And maybe that's, you know, the lesson that I needed to learn was that this is why I think I'm you know, humanity is exists, is so that we can help each other and not take from one another.
But
It's
you
a
know,
lesson, yeah.
when you help
Mm.
somebody, you get more than you give. And
I get,
that's what people
yeah,
don't
yeah.
quite understand. You know, it might be giving a pound to a beggar that deserves it, or somebody that's down on their luck, or helping an old lady across the road. Or God forbid you open the door for a woman these days. I don't quite know where that dynamic sits anymore.
Oh, just do it. Just do
But
it.
yeah, I know I do. I do. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, I was brought up in a great family that
Hold the door open
instilled.
for anybody, right? It doesn't matter. Just
Yeah,
hold doors
exactly.
open. Yeah.
Whatever they are these days, people.
Yeah.
Um,
People.
but yeah, doing good makes you feel good, and it gives you a bit of a boost for yourself. So why not do good?
I think it's a natural, some endorphin that gets produced by being of service. And maybe if there wasn't so much shame around that, I don't know, but I definitely know that when I'm of service and helping people, especially in my recovery community, I get a few hours of not thinking about myself and my fears and my insecurities. Can actually help another fellow, you know, through the experiences that I've been through.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, you're right. The reward I get for it, if it is a reward, I don't know. the feelings that I get from it are surpass what I think that they're going through.
Yeah. So it
but
is a
then
reward.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to get a little bit back more into kind of the the next year, I suppose, because companies, organizations, stigma around everything is changing. I think things are becoming more compassionate, Simon, and I think you do too. Like I think people are becoming a little bit more human in our existence and not so fear-based. But I'm interested to know your thoughts of, like, I know you're working on this amazing story about yachts and well, first of all, tell me more about it if you can.
Yeah, no, I can't. It's with a company called Investor TV, and there are bits of it that it's not going to be about yachts. It's going to be about the ethos around it. There's a load of oceanic charities involved that are trying to do good. And that's about it that I can tell you at the moment. I mean, it'll be a documentary or a series. I like the dynamic of something that is ridiculously ostentatious, that actually the industry is thinking about the damage they're doing to the planet. So it's not all about, gold toilets and whatever. It's about how the machines work and how, they don't want to carry on building these behemoths that actually don't do any good. And then they want to put back into the ecostructure what they've damaged before. So again, it's about doing good rather than doing harm. And you would say, I think people are afraid to try and do good. I think that people always try, but they're a bit afraid of reaching out because if you see somebody fall over, you might pick them up and they're so embarrassed they might throw a punch at you. There's all these dynamics, but with the industry, I think it's being greener. I think people are more aware. I think they're being allowed to help now, rather than they were trying to force fit it before.
So what you're doing is you're letting an industry that is known for ostentatious stuff, right? But so we think of people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and having more money than half the planet.
Yeah.
But yet, and we can look at Formula One racing as well. It was like a lot of people can see them as being very, very evil patriarchy systems. But I think what I'm seeing from the little bits that I'm learning, say from Formula One, is the innovations that they're coming up with that are filtering down, and Elon Musk and his electric cars. And I don't know so much about Jeff Bezos, but I know his exploration. I know he's going up into space. I don't know if he'll come back or the home planet will zap him home. I don't know, but it feels like these corporations don't, even though they are doing a lot, they still are making a lot of money. And it feels like if they let people know, the average person know what they're investing into new technologies to make the world more sustainable, to make it more ecological, to make fuel systems less polluting, but we are on that transition. They are doing that, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. But in advertising sense, a little switch gear that might make a car run leaner, nobody really cares about it. They care about what it does, but they don't want to see it. And and for a brand or a company to shout about that little one, there's only a limited audience that you need to shout about that too. They can do stories about how they're changing the environment. But then again, that's kind of more of a PR move than an advertising move. But a lot of people, Bezos, everybody you've mentioned, they're all trying to do good. And just because they've made a lot of money doesn't make them evil. It's very easy to knock them because they're up there. And Brits were great at knocking people. We're knocking it with one mistake from somebody and they're cancelled or they're vilified. I've met people that were my heroes. One motorcycle star who I won't mention, but I was a big fan of his, and I was lucky enough to bump into him in the Soho House, and I was kind of a bit starstruck, which I'm never starstruck, partly because I don't recognize anybody. But I bought him a drink, and he was horrible. And it was, really terse and whatever. So I automatically didn't like him. And then I met him
Right.
again in a different pub. It's obviously on my bag. And he was the nicest person in the world. So I judged him immediately. And I don't know what happened. You know, it could have had a death in the family, could have had a really bad day. But it was so easy for me to judge him because I thought I knew who he was. But the second time, an amazing man. So you can't just judge people on a one-off meeting. And we do it all the time because the press want to knock, you know, Amazon, or they do, you know, Amazon are trying to do really good by their people. But actually, you know, there's a couple of incidents that have happened that the media pick up and go, oh no, they're terrible. But actually, they don't know the full story behind it. And, you know, when you look at it, you think, actually, why are they knocking them? So it's easy to knock people down, is what I'm saying, when they're at the top, because they've got a big target on them.
It's what we were talking about earlier. It's easy to criticize, and I think and criticism is judgment, and it's something that, you know, I work on every day, and it's something that is a practice about how can I get through the day with less judgment, because the more I'm judging something, the more I'm carrying around my resentment that Jeff Bezos is almost, you know, he'll be a trillionaire but before he dies, and I'm
What does
going,
it
you know,
matter?
well, at the end of the day, it's not against, I shouldn't, to judge him is just a weight on me that I'm carrying around.
Yeah,
Really has
yeah.
nothing to do with, you know, because he doesn't know who I am. But I think it's just a thing of like, how can we create systems, you know, that are just more equal for people? And that's something that is just happening. I think that is an evolution of, you know, us moving from a very strict kind of patriarchal corporate system to becoming more people focused. And I think that will happen. But it's the whole idea of judgment. Doesn't matter if it's Jeff Bezos or someone who just walks by me on the street who he might be, you know, better looking guy than me, so I'm judging him, you know. But
That's pretty
I
much
mean,
everybody. No, but you
yeah,
take, you know, how many lives does Jeff Bezos help by
I don't know.
employing people, looking after people? Without people like that, people wouldn't have work, and then their lives would be really bad. You know, and you're right about the judgment thing. It is very easy to judge anybody. I mean, people are judging us from this conversation now, and you know, if it's negative, yeah, that's who I am. You know, but that's a simple thing without knowing somebody that we. And the problem is with social media and everything, we think we know everybody, but then they're not the people that we think they are. But that we see their persona, therefore, you know, you bump into them, you expect them to talk to you if they're famous because you think you know them. You don't know them. You don't know what they've gone through, and most of them have gone through hell. I'd hate to be famous, by the
Be
way.
stuck. Yeah, yeah. A lot
Uh,
of it. Well, you touched a little bit about language, that because we were talking about it yesterday. But I'm interested to know, because of social media, and just tell your story about your texting, like how people can misconstrue
uh,
language through text.
no, that was just happened recently. You know, what I thought was an innocuous text um, caused a bit of a rift between me and an old friend, but that's all fine now. But it was amazing their perception of what I wrote and my perception of what I wrote. You know, I tend to make fun of everything anyway, so you know, there are a few limits, which annoys people or doesn't annoy people. But people don't, you know, texting has been a bugbear of mine because you've got no emotion in a text. They're just words, and words can mean different things in different situations, and you could say one thing and not mean that at all. And it's, you know, as you were saying, that people who have got a struggle don't know how to voice what they need to voice, and they tend to hide things, or they tend not to say. We very rarely say what we mean, and if we do, then we're seen as militant. And I think that people have to explain themselves more, not in a judgmental way, but you know, just say what you feel. Just, you know, comment on this thing. Tell me I've been full of bullshit, and pardon the expression, and talked a load of rubbish. It's fine, I probably have, but I'm just saying what I think is right from my perspective. So you can't be, you shouldn't be cautious about saying your piece. If you've got an issue with somebody, talk it through, because I can guarantee that issue will go away. But if you don't, then you'll just become bitter and twisted about whether it's just one aspect of your life, and it'll be a big issue in 2 weeks, a year, whenever it is. So just voice it.
Yeah. I think there's a big thing about listening, listening to people, rather than just hearing them, actually listen and come back, and it's not like when someone's speaking to us and saying, I'm not feeling very well, if they've been brave enough to say, I'm not on my game today, for us to come back compassionately. Sometimes I think that's the thing, is when people do reach out and say, I'm struggling, they're not doing it because they want you to come up with a solution for them. They just want someone to listen to. And I think that if we can start practicing that more, like just active listening, instead of, oh, Simon's come to me, something's wrong with him, he's upset, I have to give that solution. And that's one thing that I'm learning in my journey, is that I'm not here to provide, solutions to people. If you come to me and you talk to me about something that I have experience in, I can listen. And then I can maybe say, hey, do you know what? This is what I did when I felt like that. And I think this is a journey that I would love people to be able to learn more about, is active listening and not coming in with solutions when people just want an ear to listen to. You know
Which
what I
is
mean?
really difficult, because you
Yeah.
always want to make people better. But as you
Yeah.
say, a lot of people just want to listen. I'm not very good at listening. I talk all the time, but it's and you normally haven't got the solution, because if there was an immediate solution out there, everybody would take it, right?
Yeah. Well, we're not, I'm not a therapist. We're not, I'm not a counselor. I'm just somebody who's been through something. So I
Yeah.
think that for me to sit there and say that I've got an answer for someone is coming from an ego-based place, which comes from a fear-based place, which is like, I'm going to be judged because I don't have the answers for you, rather than just accepting that somebody just wants someone to talk to. And I think, that's the bit that it's almost like if you could have a disclaimer before you have a conversation with someone. I'm going to tell you a bunch of stuff, but please,
you wouldn't read it anyway.
But it's that thing of like, if if somebody says, how are you doing, and you say good, and then you go, oh yeah, but I've got a bit of a sore throat and I've had some hay fever, and it's like, well, have you take this? Have you had a hot lemon and did it? Have you? And you're like, you asked me how I was feeling.
Yeah, I didn't want you to solve it. Yeah, it's as I say, people are genuinely nice and they will try and help, and they might overextend, but listening is really important. But it's the ability to say it in the first place that people need to get. So, if you are suffering, talk to anybody. Don't keep it all pent up.
Yeah, that is, I think, the message from today is just don't be afraid to ask for help, because there are people out there who will listen, and then if you ask for advice, then they can give advice too. And I know with what you're doing and with what we're doing, we're trying to create those spaces where people can say, hey, and I think that's the big thing, Simon, is that people tend to want to speak to someone who's been through something. And that's why I think celebrities, particularly the ones that you've had involved, are ones who've had things happen to them. And I think the more people can be open about showing some vulnerability around, this was not necessarily what happened, but this is what happened to me. And then this is what I did as a solution. It didn't work. And this is where I ended up. And sometimes you end up in those really dark places, prisons or hospitals or detoxes, and you feel a lot of shame about that. But I found that by letting people know that I've been there, we can get to the, oh, this is what happened to me bit. And then when we can get to this is what happened to me bit, then there's a trust, a bond that's created, where then the people who might be struggling with something can say, well, what solutions are available for me? And ultimately, that's the journey that we need to try to encourage people to get on, is one of recognition of what happened to me, what I've been doing to deal with it isn't working anymore, and what positive solutions are there available to me.
And you can only guide them on that.
Yeah, that's it. I think we're all guiding each other home, right?
Hopefully,
Yeah,
or to a better place.
yeah. What's the next few months look like for you?
Oh God, I have no idea what tomorrow is going to look like. Me, I never have. I mean, there's a reasonable amount to get on with. Hopefully fun. Hopefully, get out there and meet people again, because I miss hugging people, as we all do. That interaction has been a problem for a lot of people. I hope people are brave enough to go back when they can, into the office, not worry about going into the office, because, you know, they might not be sitting next to their friend, or the friend might not be there anymore. You know, there's always new friends to be made. I think people just need to brave it and go out there and see, you know, it's a great world at the end of the day. It can be really horrible, but it's a great world.
I think you nailed it. Well, in this conversation is that people are good,
Yeah.
you know, and find the people around you that, you know, you vibe with, and make sure it's 6 people, no more than 6
for the next 4 weeks. Yeah.
and hug and talk honestly. And it is a practice, but it's one that I know that the more that I practice it, the more peace and ease that I feel. So
yeah,
it's always a pleasure talking with you, Simon.
Likewise.
You know, I'm sure we'll be in touch over the next week or two, just to discuss Crack Not Broken and Retribe, and
definitely
maybe arranging a coffee in the park for some people.
Yeah, no, let's try and do that. And I hope this hasn't been too much nonsense for people who are watching.
Well, I think that's the thing, is 45 minutes just flies by. And, you know, there's more kind of things that you want to try to get into, but I think that if people come away from this with something, like even just, you know, being able to reach out for help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. I think that, and that people in generally are good, then that's it. Let's leave it at that.
Let's leave it at that. I'll see you soon, Nick. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for joining us at the What's on the Elephant and Castle Facebook page. We'll see you next week. Thanks.
Take care. Bye.